My name's Glyn Pooley, and I'd like to talk about art. This time, my subject is...
We can have a look at the art of Haiti today. I've got a Caribbean. There'll be more of an influence on Haiti, but the Caribbean element will come in as you will see. Interesting group of artworks, I think, because of the history of the place. Quite difficult to find old artworks from this country, and that is reflected in its culture. It's kind of going to be split up into sections that should kind of make sense the further we go. Sometimes looking at paintings, sometimes looking at some of the artifacts, and then the consequences of the artifacts as well, to try and just get a broad summary, an overview of Haitian culture. It's had such a varied history from when, Columbus discovered, inverted commas, the place in around about the 1490s and the other Caribbean islands. You've got a prehistory from there, which we'll make a note of, but we won't really look at. Primarily Colombian, and there was some native people who were there, but a lot of that's just being kind of destroyed. So what we can have a look at is some of the later work. Paintings early 20th century and earlier, there's not much left that I could find. When we look at the kind of environment that the work's being produced in, that kind of makes sense, because the area has been unfortunately prone to earthquakes and tsunamis and all kinds of things, and that has devastated the main centers that were storing some of these art. And it gives us a certain color and the kind of work that is produced. The 1940s, this was a period when they were coming out of a time when the Americans had been there. From after the first arrival of the Spanish, they go through a whole series of colonizations, and this will reflect in the art. So from the Spanish, the French, and then they have revolutions and some elements of self-rule. Then there's all kinds of uprisings in the country. It got to such a bad state that the Americans moved in about 1915 for about 20 or so years, basically because the Haitians weren't paying their international debt. But the one good thing that kind of came out of them being there was there was a chap called De Wint, I think his name was De Wint. He was a conscientious objector in the Second World War, and he helped set up a little area of school of their painting. And then works like this kind of came out of that. So we see all these different kind of influences come in through. You can see the participants in this, of course, are of African descent. Like a lot of the Caribbean countries, the slaves were taken from West Africa, Senegal, Nigeria, Benin, places like that, taken over there and just put to work in the sugar plantations. That culture they're mixing with the French culture, which was fundamentally Catholicism, which produced the kind of artworks that we're going to see, and the influence. So we see the blending of those cultures. A colloquial cockfight going on. Quite interesting kind of direct approach, almost kind of quite primitive in the way it's kind of painted, but kind of atmospheric, but documenting something which is a day, well, pretty much quite a daily activity. And this is one section of the artwork. They're kind of reflecting what they see with their eyes and how they feel about the history of the island and their culture. This one is an interesting interpretation of the landscape there. All their work is, well, a lot of their work is imbued with a spiritual dynamic and emphasis. We'll define that a little bit more as we kind of move through. But when we talked about the impact of this land and this kind of fragile, the nature of its being exposed to extreme weather conditions. You can see it in this picture. You can see like there's a real energy force flowing around it. So the artist is not just trying to portray forces in the countryside there. The artist is trying to obviously portray the energy and the spirit and the feeling and the emotions of being in that particular place and that particular environment. But you can see the way the horses are being painted, they're quite schematic. As I said, there's one element which can be described as direct and primitive, but the other element is something which is more deeply felt, which is a bit like the portrayal of them being akin to the kind of animals you would see in cave paintings in Lascaux, the same kind of spirit. And when you think of these, their ancestors were from West Africa, that was kind of heavily influenced by animism and the spirit contained in all kinds of sentient beings. You see how that kind of way of painting gets real ground in Haiti. It's a way of having a direct interaction with different forces and empowering forces as well. You've also got this figurative tradition. Now, there's a few key characteristics in this. This artist was born in the 30s. Again, I might notice it there. And they're documenting what is going on around them. You get this kind of portrayal of ordinary everyday life, but with a twist. Always kind of looking towards something deep within. But let's have a look at it in terms of the way it's painted. It's quite direct. There's certain kind of colors which kind of keep repeating. The brightness and the boldness, we always often see these blues and these oranges and yellows, the warmness of it. We see a direct portrayal of all the characters. Again, another portrayal of an event that's going on. And on one level, when you first look at it, it's kind of quite joyous with the nature of the colors, etc., and the simple quality to it. But then when you start studying the faces, and that, you can kind of see that there's some of the psychological force going on. There's a kind of serious or solemnity on the boat there in French, Salon Dieu, which is like the spiritual or the god or the wedding trip of the gods. So these people are taking a sacred trip, which they will then jump on this boat and go off into this other kind of world. So a celebratory kind of interpretation, but also something of deeper significance. And we see this when we look at a couple of this works by this artist. So it's a narrative kind of painting. It's a way of sharing and revealing what is going on, but what historically is felt and understood from their recent and sometimes distant past. So this is the same artist, and it's the same kind of thing. The colours look bright and uplifting. Again, beautiful oranges and blues. The treatment of the icons in the picture, the trees, the huts. There's a rhythm of the way the things are being portrayed. So there's a kind of community element. But then you look at the faces again, and you can tell a narrative is something else going on. These people are not particularly happy and joyous about doing this. Well, what looks like gardening initially, but it's actually road clearing. And during the American intervention and just after the American intervention, when they had some Haiti governments which were pretty corrupt, they used to have this enforced labor whereby people had to go and clear the roads for free fundamentally. So they're not that happy about it. And this is kind of seen in it. So it's documenting what's going on. It's giving us the impression of this uplift and this joy, but it's also sharing something deeper. Fascinating, because that was on in the 20th century. Of course, this goes back much further from when the slaves were originally taken there in the 1600s. Although they're blended as time has gone on, I think they call it Creole when you blend cultures from African states, for example, with French or Spanish or Portuguese. But this is still very much alive today in the way these artists are kind of seeing their history, because Haiti is still in a pretty disturbed state in terms of politically, should we say. But it's interesting to say again, how this artist has kind of captured these different figures with their different stories. It's given us an insight into a certain element of what it's like to live in Haiti. The markets and the market scene are a big theme, and they're a central part of life and culture there. But there's also always, like I mentioned, this religious aspect, like divinite. But it's like the divine or the comer or the bringer of something, if you like, something like some hope. They want hope. Again, with like this analogy of the lady coming in on a donkey. Again, this is like bits of, you might see a donkey there, but it's like old religious symbolism blended together, telling this kind of story. So it's using the culture, using their history, using what they believe into added to the narrative. But quite flat perspective, decorative almost kind of perspective in this long, deep vistas. But most of the figures and faces can be read. It's nice, interesting on this lady on the right hand side with an handbag, quite regal looking, driving across the scene, and you can enter into these kind of conversations with the different characters. You get a feel of what's kind of going on, but in this case, it's all been kind of cleaned up a little bit. Bright and vibrant, but again, as I said, cleaned up, not that really dirty or that gritty. So it's a little bit about image, of what Haiti would like to be, rather than sometimes what it actually is. It's a portrayal of something to another culture, if you like, in a way, that maybe a tourist element would like to be seeing Haiti in a certain kind of light. Gives us a slight glimpse into its culture, but it doesn't kind of reveal the darker sides, That's what makes this kind of dichotomy interesting in the work. It's like almost singing a really happy, joyous song, but the lyrics are quite sad. I suppose that's the simplistic way of seeing how these kind of works are being portrayed. But it's a lovely way of sharing what is maybe in front of you on a certain level. These are kind of icon images of how, in a way, the Caribbean sometimes is portrayed, for an outsider's point of view. There's always been, I alluded to it a little bit earlier, like the American influence on these Caribbean states. They've always tinkered with their politics and things like that, put in leaders they wanted in place. And of course, because these places are so poor, particularly Haiti, the artists have lent on one level to making things that possibly could be sold to a certain kind of market outside Haiti. But we'll see that there's other works as well, which makes it extra interesting. But in a picture like this, there's a lovely rhythm to it. You see how the figures, lovely vertical figures, scan across the picture. We get a sense of the kind of clothes people wear, with the kind of colours they wear, the sort of things they may do, carrying something on their head, etc. Though it's a little bit more arduous than balancing a little fruit like that. And we get an indication of the kind of fruit that you find in the market, and get a kind of slightly uplifted view of the place. Here is more of an interesting kind of snapshot, And, as for us, we're looking at the work of Haiti, but we think, how could we possibly translate this into our own art? So if we were trying to think about, what we see around us and what we see in our kind of culture, how would we kind of portray it, document as a kind of social document? In if so, for example, if you were walked into Cardiff and you saw these group of people sat around a monument or whatever, having a chat with each other, you think about how would you kind of portray that would give us a viewer from another place some kind of insight into not just the things that we would wear, but the way we would be kind of thinking about things. So often, you haven't got images of really cheery, uplifted, smiling people, although on the one level, the colors are cheery, uplifting, and bright, but they're kind of lost in thought or covered or slightly in the dark or looking away from each other or a bit disconnected, as well as on that other level, giving the impression that there's kind of abundance and joy in it. And that's what makes it kind of subtle. We can find out a bit about what people are, how they're interacting, but it's more like a psychological state of how they're really feeling about their situation as well. So can you see a pattern in the colors which are being used? Similar kind of colors, the oranges, the yellows, the blues. Also see a kind of pattern in the way things are being painted as well. It's like one thing feeds into another. If an artist that's fairly successful works in a certain way, other artists from a particular place work in a certain kind of way. But there's also something about the psyche of the artists from a particular place that are producing the work in a particular way. We talked about there's the element of the African influence, which is there, and parts of Africa, of course. People dress in bright clothes as well. They like to kind of show off. They like to be uplifted. People that are sometimes struggling do put on bright colours. It's a way of becoming your own uplift and sharing that with the people in your community. This becomes more noticeable in this Haitian art as we progress through this little presentation, because there's kind of community reasons that they do it. We can also see another kind of pattern which is emerging here, is this repeating quality as well. As we saw with women standing vertically with things on the head, we see the same kind of thing happening again here. So it's a good pictorial device to say to the viewer, to really emphasize to the viewer, what is the particular point of this particular picture? What are they focusing in on? By repeating something, it's like when you're talking, you get to hear it more deeply after a couple of hearings. That geometrically, they are quite dynamic as well, which is lovely. The rhythms in the houses at the back, the structures, the rhythm in the oranges, the rhythms in the people, the same kind of colors coming back before. Pictorially, on a flat plane, it's telling that story. So we're seeing those characteristics appearing over and over. Relatively flat plane again, even in this one. Colors again fairly similar. A portrayal of what a certain aspect of the life is like. Obviously, surrounded by the sea, the fish and fishermen, and that is very important. Introduction to what the landscape might be like. It looks, quite romantic on one level, but there's also hard work to be done on another level. And again, seeing this kind of repeating pattern up down, all those baskets are all bouncing all over that kind of picture. Plane perspective is gone, everything's there flat, like as if it's on a flat wall, almost diagrammatic sort of thing, as I said, you see on a cave painting, or you'd see in an Egyptian hieroglyph. It's using symbol rather than the three-dimensional quality of Western perspective. It's just a different kind of mindset. Okay. Lovely colours. This is, something which is bordering on the sort of thing a little bit that you might Gauguin might have painted, with those bright colours. Louis was, of course, in Tahiti. But we see in the use of complementary colours and exuberance in the picture. We're getting a reflection of what is present in the landscape, but we're also getting these icons, these strange iconic feelings which are coming from it. When we look at these birds up in the trees, particularly these ones at the top, they look incredibly large, of course, compared to the figures at the bottom, and they kind of look like strange owly kind of shapes, but they're not quite, they're just a symbol of a bird, or the symbol of what a bird stands for in the culture. This blending of using animals, the sense of the landscape, the sense of the colours, with the blending of the cultures. This is interesting because obviously this is looks like a biblical scene, with Noah's Ark and all the animals going around together, getting on this ark. But also right in the centre, you've got this strange ceremony going on. And this is something which is central to Haitian art. It's like a voodoo ceremony. The tradition of voodoo is something which plays a big part in the kind of work that they produce. Voodoo is a very intriguing kind of religion, I suppose, misunderstood on many, many levels, particularly for us in the West, really, because it's kind of hard to really understand how it's kind of rooted. But we'll look at a little bit of it, see if we can make any sense of it, give it a go. Here again, we've got this voodoo ceremony now, an insight into what really makes Haitian art particularly unique. Because the voodoo system was the thing which kind of held the nation together when they were standing up and fighting against colonization. It was a ceremony which sparked off the revolution that they had there in the 1790s. And it kind of they always refer back to it. Here you got, a kind of interaction with nature and the spirit world. You've got this strange owl kind of shaped figure again, this wise bird. But the way nature is wrapped all around them as well, an integral part, is giving it extra strength. And then, of course, the little figure in the center is being focused on. In the past, voodoo's got a different bad kind of reputation because they did all kinds of sacrifices and things, usually animals. But it was a way of kind of tapping into the deep subconscious and psychological state of the participants. So you could see how that kind of collective force kind of would bind a community together, particularly when they were suppressed, and then how that would influence the art that they were kind of produce as well. It had to be central often to it. This is a kind of interesting image in terms of the strength of the figure gazing back at us. In a way, it's a more realistic portrayal of what it might be like to live in a Haitian village, although a lot of them live in kind of the township of Port-au-Prince in the center capital. But you can imagine the direct gaze of this figure is kind of sending out a message to question us now about the environment they find themselves in. The image reminds me of an image by Sidney Nolan, the Australian artist, where he uses the Aboriginals to kind of question the position they find themselves in. And it's the same kind of image here. And it's very strong, it's very questioning, it's very confrontational, and asking how did this kind of thing has happened, and why is it happening, and how we're living through this kind of process as well. If any of you are particularly interested in Haitian history, have got an hour or so sometime, have a quick look through it, because it is incredibly fascinating and rich. And I'm sure we could all learn a lot from it. We'd hope that things will change over there fairly quickly in a positive way. But because it's such a relatively small place, and there's all these different cultures kind of coalesced on the place as well, it creates a kind of intriguing art. This narrative pictures that we're kind of seeing here, telling this kind of story about the sense of place and what's going on, but then the deeper heartfelt feelings of their spiritual connection, which is, as I said, deeply rooted in their African cultures as well, just makes for kind of quite a complex reading and understanding for us in the West. But, it all feeds into our art, and there'll be something in it that will kind of resonate with us. As you can see in something like this, the Iowa ponder Haiti's destiny, and Azuli Frida, the goddess of love. These are icons which are in Voodoo culture, really. The Iowa are kind of the spirit world, and it's interesting. Like the Madonna and the Black Madonna are things which are pretty predominant in the way their main iconography, which of course are coming from Catholicism, the mother and child, but then this kind of intriguing blending quality. Questioning why is our culture so turbulent, really, and how can we transform it into something which is a lot more livable for most. For us to try and understand some of the iconography at the bottom here and the diagrams is quite tricky. We can make a stab, but we'll see. This is an interesting insight into the other world of, if you like, Voodoo interpretation that runs through their pieces. It's a strange, unusual world. You can see they don't shy away from portraying things like the death or dead, the spirits in that perspective, next to a marriage of different cultures, the inner world that is kind of in the mind of a particular community or spirit, portrayed right in the center here, in a similar kind of way that the Aboriginals portrayed their spiritual world or their dream times. There's a kind of overlap there. And then you've got the iconography of the angels at the top, which of course people know from the West, but they've given them a kind of darker feeling, darker kind of reading, where they look like they don't have heavenly beings, but sometimes they don't look as happy as maybe they could be, as uplifting as they could be, which maybe is kind of more honest in terms of how they're experiencing their life. But you've got these layers, one layer wrapped on top of another. What I particularly quite like about this is this almost ghostly feel that you've got at the foreground. The figures, although they're there, they're almost kind of transparent. So they're in this landscape, which is primarily green-blue, but the figures in the front are almost like something which is not substantial. And I think in a culture like Haiti, which was constantly changing, transitory, with so many things of layers of happenings, this transitory quality is an intriguing kind of intriguing part of their language that they keep sharing. Yeah, it kind of, there's something deep about this. It's hard to put your finger on, really, but it's you just have to look at it, gaze at it, and then I think have an interaction with it. And I think it's just about being open. And for us as artists, it's how we experience our existence, and then how we multi-layer an image so that we get different dimensions of it. So when we have an experience, maybe we go to an occasion, say it was a wedding, and on one level it might be a happy occasion, but there'll be other layers of understanding about it that might not be so happy, and other things about the people and the experience where you're at, and also what else is being portrayed at that particular time in relation to the wedding. And then what is the symbol of the wedding as well? It's a joining of two forces. Often, in this case, this is a symbol of cultural forces. And how can you portray these kinds of things? How can you portray something which is solid? How can you portray something which is transitory as well? And then place them all down in a particular interpretation. And these Haitian artists, particularly later now, this is what they're offering more and more. This is intriguing because this is obviously a voodoo altar and shows some of the key things which they use to transfer their language across to us. So you can see like these icons, which is the Catholicism kind of influence. You start to see these flags, which has become a major part of Haitian art. They paint these flags, which they take to ceremonies and also take around the community and streets. They tell their story on the flags, and then you have these sculptures as well, which are kind of again representations of certain spirit gods, which goes back to the old African sculptures that are kind of manifestations of something deep and something rich. So these layering up of information gets us deeper into deeper understanding. So this is an example of a flag painting, which they'll have around them at these, as I said, these ceremonies or in the community. It is like a Madonna, Madonna image, but it's the Black Madonna. And this Fortilius, how do we say that? The Zuli is again the spirit or the Madonna of love and uplift and generosity and help, if you like, in this culture. And she's surrounded by a certain level of abundance. We can see, we can read it pretty straightforward. She's emanating a sense of abundance, but she's also questioning us as well in terms of how we understand our perception in relation to that abundance. The iconography of the white and the blue, of course, are spiritual connotations. The deep red is spiritual. The greens, of course, is nature and flowers, etc. They're all there to kind of give you that kind of impression, but using Caribbean or Haitian colors again. Sorry, the oranges, the greens, the yellows, the whites. It's a certain kind of language. And here we have the female goddess, a spirit goddess of the water, the black goddess of uplift. Again, she's surrounded by nature, and these quite large images, and they're very direct. They speak to us on a kind of primal way, I think. On one level, they look quite simple, but they're not. And when they're made, often there's a number of people in the community get together to make them, and some of them are just covered in beads and sequins and all kinds of shimmering kind of materials, which, when they're transported outside, of course, catch the sunlight. But having a portable bit of art, which is also an icon, like a flag is intriguing. And I know they're very strong images because people do kind of take a lot of information in from iconic flags. So, it's on one level it's decorative, but on another level it's kind of deep and communicative. Fascinating. Oh, this is another example of the voodoo flag that's been covered in sequins. You can see some of the iconography, the heart or the fruit. But this triangle and this kind of line shining up, expanding upwards and outwards from this triangle is something, some deep ancient symbols that you find in anything from the Kabbalah, in Judaism, to Egyptian art, to certain Western cultures, all kind of involved in it. Um, they're strong, and these kind of sculptures that they make as well, these voodoo masks. So we've got the paintings, we've got the narrative pictures of their culture, we've got the flags which they kind of make, which is all related to this voodoo quality, and then you've got these wooden carved sculptures. The wooden ones are particularly prized because wood is limited there, which they of course take out into the community, and they believe these spirits that they've made here, these sculptures, are actually living spirits. And there's a quality in them that is, if you're sensitive enough, you connect with it. Seems a bit baffling to our Western kind of head kind of way of experiencing a lot of things. But I suppose if you're a community and you're all moved in a certain kind of way, the energy which would come from that could be incredibly striking. And you can see the number of them in the background. And yeah, they have whole communities, families of these spirits. I don't know the names of all of them, but I'm sure people who studied voodoo would know, that the different families that are there have different kind of characteristics. And then the voodoo priest would kind of bring these different qualities to the community to help them and uplift them, or to get rid of a certain kind of thing that they might be struggling with. And if you really, really, really believe in it, and you've historically believed in it, it can have great force. It can even transform the community, as it did structurally. Looking at them, they look like, again, those like African sculptures that we might have seen. This looks quite portable, where they kind of put different aspects onto this voodoo doll, this voodoo sculpture, that can kind of transfer certain kind of messages. It's almost like some moving from ancient shamanism, which is linked to animism and a connection with the land deeply, to using iconography that the contemporary group around them could understand. We can all see locks and have readings for locks and being locked up and being trapped and things like that, or being contained. And you've got pictures, picture frames there with nothing in, but something's wrapped around it, so there's something contained there, something hidden or something missing. And then you got this questioning head, which we can kind of read, which kind of has a dialogue with a figure. From the doll aspect of it, we project ourselves onto it. So you can see how they can be strong artworks, artifacts. But when the culture that you're living in is deeply concerned and connected with that, as well, it has extra strength. And I suppose particularly if your culture you're living in is very disrupted, very poor on lots of levels, materially poor, you're spending a lot of time searching inwardly for inner strength, linking with the community as well, but really using the imaginative quality of yourself to survive your day-to-day life. So when these kinds of images and these things are being presented to you, then they have an even stronger impact. And Haitian art has kind of tapped into this, and it's just slowly emerging into the art world now, and people are becoming a little bit more interested in it. And it's an interesting dialogue they're having, because you got the emphasis, you got the colonial power, ex-colonial powers, of course, that have got conscience about some sense of conscience about what they actually did to these people in this place and their impact on it, so how they interact with it, as you have with the American market as well. They're wanting parts of it, but they're also concerned about how they have any relationship with that particular culture. This is an older photograph. It's interesting to see how those different aspects are kind of literally wrapped up together. The flags are there, the symbols on the floor, those ancient symbols, the different artifacts which would be used to transform during the ceremony, the particular participants. and give them a kind of insight into their other world, this deep psychological state that might be transforming them. It's sometimes the most powerful aspect of a certain human being's motivation. Why do they behave in a particular way? How do they operate in a particular way? If you can somehow understand that on a different level, because they've been wrapped in a particular history, then you can unlock things for people. You can kind of enable them to be freer, both emotionally, physically, and then manifest that into their community. I suppose this is all wrapped up into all this iconography. This is interesting because, as you can see, they've created a whole family of these voodoo spirits, living in a particular part of the temple or the world or the room, and they're all interacting with each other. So they really believe that these are alive beings, and they're having an impact on the community. They go about their business when maybe we'd be doing something else. So this is some contemporary sculpture now by an artist, which is shown at the Biennales, Venice Biennales, and different aspects now around in the art world. And you can see you can see how these kind of images and these kinds of artworks influence the surrealists of the 20th century. Like ready-mades, they find whatever they can knocking about. Some of their sculptures and things are made from old oil drums being washed up on the sea, and all kinds of bits and pieces, detritus and debris that they find around. They recycle this, that, and the other, but to then make these voodoo effigies, these things which are deep in their kind of culture that they can kind of relate to. And then you've got we touched on the masks, the old African mask culture, but that's something which is another aspect of their art. And they use them to take the spirits of different animals or spirits of different forces, and then they turn them around into this collective force, which is a really key aspect to Haitian and Caribbean and South American culture, and that's the joy of Carnival. When Carnival happens, this is the focus of the year. This is the focus for the communities to let go and rejoice and come together and share all these things that we'll be talking about tonight. It's a release from a certain kind of struggle, but it's also a sharing of a shared understanding. And you can see how each person becomes this living spirit, using the same kind of colours that you're seeing in the paintings, the oranges, the greens, the blues, and that kind of thing. They decorate themselves. And the carnival, if you like, is a kind of rebellion, but it's a language of the people, for the people. Everyone can take part in it. Everyone can be part of it. Everyone can contribute to it as well. It's not a top-down authority in that respect. It's the people being this living art form, this living community, and then they start sharing it. So there's a real joy in that. And that's come out of these layers and layers of cultural history that they've kind of brought to the situation.
If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell notification.